What would you do for the one you love? Would you let the world fall into chaos just to keep him or her safe? Well, Gust and Koei Tecmo bring you a tale of two lovers in the Knights of Azure, which came out on March 29th in America for $59.99. But before I begin, I suggest watching my review score video if you haven't already. It'll help to make some sense of things that you'll see throughout this review. Let's start with the story. You play as Arnis, a holy knight who's tasked to battle the evil of the land, the Night. The battle has been raging for ages, as the world was transformed after a decisive battle between the forces of good and the Night Lord. After the Night Lord was defeated, his blue blood rained down upon the land, and those who came in contact with it were corrupted, with many of them turning into fiends. However, Arnis, who was also hit by the mysterious blue blood, is now half demon, but is one of the only infected who maintained her humanity. It's obvious that she's special, but why she was able to retain herself where others have not poses a big question for the story as a whole. Sure, there are others like her, but Arnis is just a tiny bit more special. She works for the Curia, a mysterious group that does their best to protect the land from the night, and she becomes the new protector of the new Saint Lilise, who she knows from her past. Now, the idea of the Saint is simple. Think Yuna from Final Fantasy X. The Saint is destined to delay the end of the world by sacrificing her life for the sake of humanity, which is a bit of a problem for Arnis, who has developed feelings for Lilise, and vice versa. Yes folks, this is a love story with two female protagonists, which seems to be rare for the Japanese RPG genre, surprisingly. This romance causes the main source of tension in the plot, as Arnis' job for the Curia and their pulling of strings will come into direct conflict with Lilise's well-being. The major themes of the game have to do with the value of the individual versus the group, what it means to live, and the relationship that grows between Arnis and Lilise. Now thankfully, the two do have a chemistry with each other, in an awkward middle school romance type of way. It's clear they don't know what they're doing in the field of love, caught between their responsibilities as saviors of the world and not knowing how to express their feelings with each other. Both characters are willing to sacrifice everything so the other can live, but they come to the realization that it would destroy the other person in the process. And this fight between duty and love has a real charm to it. It's the growth of that relationship and the two becoming truly honest with each other is where the game's writing is at its best. It's a tragic tale, but unlike Romeo and Juliet, you have this feeling that these two will find a way, even if all the world is barreling down on top of them. Now with that said, you'll be screaming, "Get on with it," at times, because their awkwardness can go a bit too far. It got to the point where even myself, a person who needs a neon sign to understand if someone is hitting on me, was wondering how the hell they could keep avoiding the signs and the issues at play. But on the flip side, that's why it sort of works. That blurry line of whether they are being purposefully dense to protect the other does work rather well here. In particular, those awkward segments are complemented by their dream forms, which is where their dream selves can interact, but they can't lie to each other. This creates a contrast that really works to build each character. The romance is different, but it comes off genuine. So if a romance story really gets you invested in a game, then I think the Knights of Azure delivers, and you should enhance the game's score with 7 more additional points. What doesn't necessarily work is everything else in the story. There is some intrigue that develops due to the Curia and the history of events that the game presents. There are some good twists here and there, and it does add some good world-building elements. But at every moment, those other elements take a back seat to the romance story, and it did hurt the game's progression at times. It shows in particular with the side characters in the game. The weird Demonologist, the traitor, merchant, thief. Of course they have their moments in the story, but honestly, not a lot is lost if they weren't there. They feel there mostly to provide side quests, and that's basically it. Sure, there's an element here and there that hits, but if you require your RPGs to provide a lot of depth to the world via storytelling or side characters, Knights of Azure will fail to deliver for you, and you'll need to knock 5 points based off the base score. Because this story has to be carried entirely by Arnis and Lilise. With the story out of the way, let's get to the combat. This one is a mixture of a very basic action RPG and of all things Pokemon. Yeah, you heard me, Pokemon. Let's start with Arnis. Arnis can fight with her demon sword, firing off light and heavy attacks with basic combos on each of them. She can dodge roll around the battlefield, guard against attacks, and can use some SP to deal a special attack as well. Later on, she gets the ability to change her demon sword into another form, such as daggers, which can poison and do a series of fast attacks, to a hammer that can literally break combat thanks to the third hit stunning an enemy. Each weapon has a particular set of skills that help them immensely in a particular situation, but no weapon, with the exception of the guns, can't be used for a general combat strategy as well. Arnis' direct portion of combat is rather straightforward. Avoid getting hit, do the same combo over and over again, rinse and repeat. In fact, at times, it can get extremely boring. The lack of varied combos or more spectacle to her fighting style makes it feel like she's not the star of her own show. So if you're relying on a more action-oriented game to really enjoy it, knock 5 points off this base score, because the Knights of Azure, it won't deliver in the action genre. Now, while your actions are basic and rather one-note, the real variety in battle is going to come from your Servant, which are basically creatures for you to summon to help you in battle. Spending SP will have a creature come to the field to battle with you. Now you can customize a group of 4 to battle alongside you at one time, which range from creatures that will beat the crap out of enemies to the most important creatures in the game, the healers. I can't emphasize this enough. Healers are the most important creatures in this game. If you play this game, this is the first lesson you need to learn. See, you have no traditional potions or items in this game in terms of consumables, but each of your creatures have skills that you can activate based on their own SP and skill set. And with that being one of the only ways to massively heal your character, yeah, they're rather important. Now, one thing that adds some complication to the battle is the deck system. See, I can have a group of 4 Servant out at once, but I can also switch to another group of Servant as well. Now that desummons everyone out in the field, but you can bring out another set to tag in at that point. And this is where the game's combat starts to shine. The idea of using your teams, swapping them in and out to maximize your effectiveness on the battlefield is rather fun. If 1 or 2 summons get knocked out, you can swap to another set to keep the pressure up and give them time to recover. And with each of the summons having elemental strengths, finding a right combination to deal with certain enemies is a huge boon, and there's some real strategy you can develop in the right combinations as well. Pairing up Spam here to slow down enemies with his ability with a creature that can hit a nice AoE attack, actually rather cool. This game in particular does a great job in allowing you to play the scientist. If you love playing around with combinations and experimenting with different configurations of battle, trying to find the best formula for your playstyle, Knights of Azure does deliver. And if that sounds like you, then the score should be enhanced by 8 points appropriately. What further enhances this though is the tying of these creatures to your SP bar. See, in order to summon a creature, you spend SP points, and those regenerate over time. So summoning a bunch of creatures at once is possible, but leaves you without a lot of options otherwise. And so now you've got to be tactical. Do I only battle with 3 summons right now so I can bring out the healer if I get into major trouble? These questions really take the game to the next level. In addition, what seems to be in every RPG or action game nowadays, you build a meter that can help unleash a super form, which is based on the elemental alignment of your deck that you're currently using. Now there are 4 main ones, which range from the agile bunny form that can have you speed across the map and attack like a highly efficient ninja, to the more standard mage form, which can recover SP rather quickly and can heal your summons. But flaws are present in combat. While there's good variety to enemies and your servant choices, you can't help but feel like you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. Sure, new enemies come out and all, but frankly, the grind of taking on yet another group of wolves will get to you at some point, because it's not that different from the last set of enemies you faced. Yeah, it's an action RPG, but part of the major problem here as well is the difficulty. For the most part, the game is rather easy, as you can hack and slash your way through elements with really no problems. I got bored rather easily, even with the switching of Servant, and this alone really caused a hit to the game's base score. It just dragged out way too long without changing things up significantly in terms of the combat. The only real challenges in my opinion end up being the boss fights, where a majority of my deaths happened. They are the highlight of combat, adding new elements and the actual challenge, albeit unfair challenge at times, but at least a challenge nonetheless. In fact, I would say 90% of my deaths came from the boss fights. Now, there aren't that many in the game, which is a shame, but at times, they were way too spread out. It doesn't help that the side quests of the game don't really have any boss fights, which means I really hated the side quests. But Jesus Christ, this boss fight. This last boss fight not only took the fight to an insane new level, it introduced mechanics that you hadn't dealt with up to that point. And they really changed the experience for the negative. Whoever from Gust developed this one particular fight, I'm calling you out. You're a dick, and you don't know how to design a good, fair fight. Now, there's some typical bad boss mechanics here, like the boss being able to heal itself, but the actual healing is unclear on how it's done, so you don't know how to interrupt it. But the bigger problem is what seems to be the ceiling of your summons. And that's huge, especially with those aforementioned healing summons. Now, I'm assuming they're sealed, because they flip over with no way to recover them at all, as they don't seem to count down in terms of their usability. This one fight almost made this video a first impressions, as it tested my patience immensely. I don't get why the sudden increase in difficulty, and it soured the ending for me a bit. I had to let it sink in before I could give this game a really fair score, because it really messed with my enjoyment and kept on coming to the back of my head. Sure, this is the big bad dude and one of the final bosses. This is the one that caused so many problems for the story. But anytime you have a game go from first gear to 9th, you're asking for a heap of trouble. But the overall gameplay does have other problems as well. For example, you know how easily I got lost in this game? Now, you've got several points of entry of levels at times, and quests that may have you go back to a specific place. But it's very easy to get turned around or have no idea where to go next. With only the minimap and no overall world map to work with, you'll waste a bit of time going in one direction only to find that, nope, you went the wrong way. Now granted, I'm the person who ended up in Wisconsin after trying to get back home one day, so my sense of direction, it sorta sucks. But I think this is a general problem that people will have with this game. But I also really never got the timer in this. See, this timer is how long you can be in the field before having to end your run. And you know how many times it actually came into play in terms of providing stress on me to complete? Once. Right before the end boss. It feels tacked on for no good reason and doesn't really have a consequence to it. Sound design also is a major problem trying to complement combat. In particular with pointing out you've been inflicted with status effects or taking damage, it's non-existent. It's funny, almost every death in a non-boss situation came from me not realizing I was losing health fast, and then all of a sudden, boom, I'm dead. It was extremely annoying. The voice acting is entirely in Japanese, so again, it's hard for me to judge. When I did pay attention closely, I don't think it was the greatest, as there seems to be a lack of emotion, I'm guessing? Now granted, the strong female character in the Japanese world has different traits than a strong American female character. But the only character that I really got a voice range out of was the Demonologist, and he was one of the more annoying characters. Some of these characters' voice acting felt dead to me, and I don't think that was their intended character's personality. Music, as I always say, is subjective, so let me give you a sample of some of the tracks, and see if it's up your alley. But you know what really surprised me? This game has performance problems. During battles, there are times where you can see significant frame drops, and they aren't that uncommon. And despite my testing, I couldn't really find a common element of when it occurred. Now I know it occurred during battle and seemed to happen more often when more enemies were on the screen, but that did prove to be inconsistent at times. Now look, we're not talking Hyrule Warriors on the old 3DS performance, but it was significant enough that it started to really tick me off when I was getting into the latter half of the game. In the end, Knights of Azure was an unsteady journey that was captivating in some aspects, but really boring in some others. For every strength the game had, it seemed to have a low that dragged it down, to the point where it made for a middle-of-the-road game. But its highest highs did not outweigh some of its lowest lows, as the problems definitely were the things I thought of first when scoring this review. Due to that, the game comes in at a 68 out of 100, meaning it's a game I'd wait for a deep sale if you're only working off the base score. But you should take into account the enhancing system as always, as it may bump the score into a different level depending on your gaming preferences. It's a game that I can easily see the score being all over the place on. The amounts of highs and lows that the game have could be very telling on how a person goes about their review, how a collection of small problems could affect an overall score, how one element of a story may be critical for a game's success. This is the reason I always recommend to get multiple opinions before you make a game purchase if you can, because there's so many angles that you can take to get to the end result of a review. And even the most objective reviews, the ones that do the best to isolate those subjective elements, will still have subjectivity in the end. Thanks for watching. Like the video, share it with a friend, and subscribe if you want more content like this. In the description below, you'll find the Steam review accompanying this vid, along with social media that you can follow me on, Twitter, Google+, and Facebook groups. And if you want to support the channel, click that Patreon on the left of the screen. And remember, keep on gaming.